Chicago on a rain-slicked Monday morning was a chaotic blur of sharp edges, screeching brakes, and rushing crowds. I left our apartment at precisely 6:50 a.m., running so late that I only managed a single bite of my bagel before wrapping it in a napkin and shoving it haphazardly into my leather tote bag. My public relations firm had a massive, career-defining pitch scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon down in the Loop with a major corporate client. If our team managed to close this deal, the entire department would secure a hefty year-end bonus, and I would finally have a real shot at being promoted to team lead, a milestone I had spent nearly 6 years working like an invisible shadow to earn. My name is Chloe. I am 32 years old, and I have been married to my husband, David, for 3 years. David is 2 years older than me and works as a technical drafter for a boutique interior design firm in the city. To outside observers, our neighbors, our co-workers, our casual friends, our marriage was the picture of quiet stability. There was no public drama, no scandalous breakups, and no explosive screaming matches echoing through the hallway of our apartment building. I used to foolishly believe that was all a woman could ever ask for in life: a respectable job, a solid roof over her head, and a pleasant man who came home every evening to share dinner at the kitchen table. But life has a cruel way of proving that some things can look perfectly intact on the outside while silently rotting from the inside out. As I stepped off the elevator into the lobby, I dug through my tote bag to pull out my phone and check my morning emails. When the screen lit up, I froze mid-stride. The background wallpaper was not the vibrant photograph of the blue hydrangeas growing on our balcony, the picture I had used for over 2 years. Instead, it was a photo of David standing outside Wrigley Field holding up a Cubs scarf, grinning like a broad-faced kid on Christmas morning. I let out a heavy, frustrated sigh, my shoulders slumping. In my manic rush to get out the door, I had grabbed the wrong device. David and I owned the exact same black iPhone model, both encased in identical clear protective covers. It was an honest mistake that had happened a couple of times before, but usually only on lazy weekends when we were lounging around the apartment. Today, however, I was already behind schedule, and there was absolutely no time to go back upstairs. I told myself it didn't really matter. David was working the swing shift that day, meaning he wouldn't even need to leave the apartment until late afternoon. He could easily use my phone to make any calls, and we would simply swap them back when I returned home that evening. By the time I navigated the slick sidewalk and reached the station, the L train was already squealing to a halt along the platform. I squeezed myself into the packed car, standing near the double rear doors. The train car was suffocatingly crowded, filled with the pungent scents of cheap perfume, stale takeout coffee, vibrating notifications, and the repetitive automated voice instructing passengers to stand clear of the closing doors. The chaotic noise only served to make the dull throb behind my eyes worse. Just as the train rumbled across the river, the phone in my palm buzzed violently. The screen flashed with an incoming call from Sarah, David's younger sister. I hesitated for a moment. Under normal circumstances, I preferred not to answer my husband's personal calls, and I certainly had no desire to get dragged into his family's endless domestic drama so early in the morning. But thinking it might be a genuine emergency regarding his mother, I swiped the screen to accept the call and raised the receiver to my ear. Before I could even utter a polite hello, Sarah's voice cut through the line, fast, sharp, and demanding as it always was. "Hey, Dave. Mom wants to know if you've finally talked to Chloe about the condo yet. Have you? You keep dragging your feet on this, and Mom is getting super anxious." I went completely still, the noisy train car fading into a dull hum around me. It felt as though a solid lump of ice had instantly lodged itself in my throat. Hearing no immediate response and assuming the line had a poor connection, Sarah pressed on without taking a breath, her tone growing visibly irritated. "Look, Dave, it's that condo in Lincoln Square of hers. Mom said you need to sweet-talk her into putting your name on the deed right now. If you wait too long and she somehow changes her mind, we are completely screwed. That place could easily sell for $450,000 in this current market. We sell it, pull the cash, and buy that big house out in Napperville. Mom will co-sign with you just to keep things safe. That way, I can open my independent esthetician studio in the finished basement, and Mom can live right there with you guys to help out around the house. I stood frozen in the middle of the crowded train, the hand holding the phone turning ice cold. The small, sunlit condo in Lincoln Square was the property my mother had purchased for me shortly before she passed away from cancer 4 years ago. It was not a sprawling mansion, just a modest one-bedroom unit on a quiet, tree-lined street. But it was the single tangible thing my mother had left behind for me in this world. When she was terminally ill in the hospital, holding my trembling hand, she had made me promise her over and over again, "Chloe, a woman can love her husband deeply. She can care for her in-laws. But you must always keep this condo strictly in your own name. It is your safety net. It is the one place you can stand back up on your own 2 feet if one day you find yourself with nobody left." At the time, I had cried, kissing her pale cheek and telling her she was overthinking things. I had assured her that David loved me unconditionally, that his family was decent, and that I would never need a safety net. Now, standing on a crowded train, every single word my dying mother had spoken felt like a burning needle sinking into my chest. On the other end of the line, Sarah kept talking, completely oblivious to who was actually listening to her shameless plotting. Mom says if Chloe asks why you suddenly need your name on the deed, just tell her it's for legal estate planning and your long-term future together. Play the romantic angle, Dave. She's a softie, she'll cave in no time. Besides, her mom is dead and her dad lives all the way out of state with his new family. Who's going to step in and defend her if she gets upset? Don't be such a pushover. When you married her, Mom explicitly said she was a great catch, because she had her own real estate and a solid income, but her family support is practically non-existent. It would be a complete waste not to utilize what she has. I closed my eyes tightly as the train abruptly jerked to a stop at the next station. I stumbled forward, my shoulder slamming painfully into the cold metal grab bar, but that physical impact was nothing compared to the sickening feeling of my heart being shattered into 1,000 pieces. Sarah lowered her voice slightly, as if she were sharing top-secret corporate intelligence. And what about that extra cash her mom left her? It was around $80,000, right? Tell her you want to use it as seed capital to start your own custom woodworking business. She adores you so much she'll totally hand it over without a fight. Leaving that money sitting in a mutual fund is a total waste anyway. She married into our family, Dave. Her money is our family's money. My ears were ringing so loudly I could barely hear the ambient noise of the train. That $80,000 was the combined payout from my mother's life insurance policy and her modest life savings. I had never bragged about it to anyone. I had only confided in David because I foolishly believed that true spouses should never keep financial secrets from one another. I had trusted him to a point of sheer stupidity. Suddenly, a painful memory from 6 months ago flooded back to me with brutal clarity. David had casually mentioned a friend who wanted to partner up to open a custom furniture shop, claiming they needed about $40,000 in initial startup capital. He had subtly suggested that if I pulled a portion of the money from my inheritance, the long-term profits would belong to both of us equally. I had almost agreed back then. Thank God I had decided to do some private digging first, only to discover his friend was drowning in personal debt, prompting me to decline. David had given me the cold shoulder for an entire week afterward, eating his meals in silence and locking himself in our bedroom. I had actually blamed myself back then, feeling guilty for being too calculating and unsupportive of my husband's dreams. As it turned out, his family had been eyeing my mother's legacy from the very beginning. Dave? Are you even listening to me? Sarah's shrill voice snapped me back to reality. I opened my eyes, staring at my pale reflection in the train's glass doors. My eyes were bloodshot, but there were no tears falling down my face. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely above a quiet whisper. Sarah. An absolute, deafening silence descended upon the line. A few seconds passed before Sarah's voice returned, trembling and hesitant. Chloe. Is that you? Why do you have Dave's phone? I grabbed it by mistake this morning, I said, my voice eerily calm, as though the person whose life had just been destroyed wasn't actually me. And I heard every single word you just said. No. Chloe, wait. Listen to me. Sarah stammered frantically. Let me explain. I was just joking around. Mom and I make silly jokes like that all the time. Please don't take it seriously. A joke? I let out a dry, bitter laugh, my insides turning to solid ice. Joking about taking the condo my dead mother worked her whole life to leave me. Joking about taking the last bit of savings she left to protect me. Joking about how I have no family left to defend me, so I'm an easy mark for your family. You are blowing this way out of proportion. Sarah's tone suddenly shifted, growing defensive and shrill. We didn't mean it like that. We are family, Chloe. What's so wrong with wanting us all to live close together and support each other? I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. What's wrong is that you never once saw me as family, Sarah. You saw me as a piece of prime real estate, as a convenient bank account, and as an isolated woman who was easy to manipulate. Pass this message directly to your mother and your brother. The condo in Lincoln Square is my separate property. Not a single brick in that building will ever belong to the Miller family. And as for the money my mother left me, I will keep it, spend it, or burn it as I see fit. None of you have the right to calculate how to spend my life. Chloe, wait. I ended the call instantly, cutting her off in mid-sentence. Suddenly, the world around me went deathly quiet. The train was still roaring along the tracks, people were still pushing past me to reach the doors, and the automated system was still announcing upcoming streets, but inside my head, there was only my mother's soft, echoing voice. It is your safety net. I hugged my tote bag tightly against my chest, standing perfectly still until the train finally pulled into my station downtown. As I stepped out onto the platform and walked toward my office building, the phone in my hand began to vibrate continuously. The screen displayed my own cell phone number. David had obviously woken up, realized we had swapped phones, and received a frantic, panicked call from his sister. I stared at the flashing screen and let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then, the text messages began pouring in rapid succession. Chloe, please pick up. Sarah was just talking nonsensical garbage, you know how she is. Don't take it to heart, babe. I'll explain everything to you tonight. I stood on the sidewalk, reading those hollow words for a long time. If this had happened yesterday, I might have desperately searched for an excuse to believe him. I would have convinced myself that Sarah was just foolish, that my mother-in-law was simply old-fashioned, and that David meant no genuine harm. I would have swallowed the bitter lump in my throat just to keep the peace in our home. But today, I had heard the unvarnished truth with my own ears. Once trust shatters so completely, apologies are nothing more than cheap, useless tape placed over broken glass. I looked up at the towering glass facade of my corporate building. The massive client pitch was waiting for me on the 20th floor. I still had a job to do. The contract still needed to be won. My life was not going to collapse simply because a family of greedy parasites had finally shown their true colors. As I walked through the revolving doors into the lobby, a cold, unwavering resolve settled deep within my soul. Tonight, when I returned to the apartment I had shared with David for 3 years, I would no longer be the soft, accommodating, easily duped wife he thought he owned. I would ask him one simple question: did you marry me for who I am, or did you marry me for the deed to my mother's house? And regardless of what lies he offered in response, my exit strategy was already fully in motion. I walked into the corporate conference room at 8:20 a.m., my hands icy cold despite the building's central heating humming softly in the background. On my laptop screen, the pitch deck was open and ready, but the refined words I had stayed up until 1 o'clock in the morning polishing suddenly blurred together into an unreadable smear. My mind was completely incapable of focusing on client metrics, market projections, or quarterly budgets. Instead, it was endlessly playing Sarah's shrill, recorded voice on a loop in my head. Her mom is dead, and her dad lives out of state. Who's going to step in and defend her? In the eyes of the Miller family, my profound personal grief was not something to be comforted or respected, it was merely a convenient legal loophole to be ruthlessly exploited. My department manager walked past my desk a few minutes later and paused, looking down at me with genuine concern. "Chloe, are you feeling okay? You look pale as a ghost." I looked up, forcing a tight, professional smile onto my face. "I'm completely fine, Mark. Just haven't had my morning coffee yet. I'm fully prepared for the 2 o'clock pitch. I know exactly how crucial this account is for the firm." "Good to hear," he said, giving me an encouraging nod before walking away. "Hang in there." Left alone again, I glanced down at David's phone resting on the wood desk. The screen lit up with another incoming text message: "Chloe, please just listen to me. You know how Sarah runs her mouth without thinking. The thing about the Lincoln Square condo. I was going to talk to you about it eventually, but absolutely not the way she made it sound." Reading his calculated text, a dozen small, uncomfortable memories that I had previously brushed off over the past 3 years suddenly snapped into agonizingly clear focus. I vividly remembered my mother-in-law making passive-aggressive remarks during our last Thanksgiving dinner, sighing dramatically as she served food. "It really isn't healthy for a young woman to hold too many independent assets solely in her own name. Spouses need to trust each other completely and share everything if a marriage is actually going to last." I remembered David looking over the annual property tax bill for the Lincoln Square condo a few months ago, casually remarking over coffee, "Once we decide to have kids, we really ought to sell this place off and use the equity as a down payment for a massive house in the suburbs." I remembered Sarah visiting our apartment last summer, glancing around our living room with a sneer, "You're so absurdly lucky, Chloe. Your mom passed away, but at least she left you prime Chicago real estate. Nobody is ever going to hand me anything like that on a silver platter." Back then, I had naively assumed Sarah was just tacky and bitter. Now, the hidden venom underlying those calculated words was crystal clear. I turned the phone completely off, flipped it face down on the desk, and forced every ounce of my willpower to focus on my work. The high-stakes client pitch lasted nearly 2 full hours. I stood before the board of executives, presented our strategic campaign, answered technical data questions, and smiled at precisely the right moments. I functioned with flawless professional perfection, acting as though my entire personal life hadn't been brutally torn open just hours prior. When the lead client finally smiled, nodded in approval, and announced they were excited to sign the contract, my team quietly cheered around the table. My manager looked utterly thrilled, but I felt only a profound, hollow exhaustion, an exhaustion so deep that my hands shook uncontrollably beneath the dark wood of the conference table. Right after the meeting concluded, the personal cell phone resting inside my leather tote bag, the one I had synced to my work laptop's messaging system, began ringing frantically. It was Jessica, my absolute best friend since our college days. "Chloe, where are you right now? Are you still at the office?" Her voice demanded, vibrating with urgent, fiery anger. "Yes, I'm just wrapping up a meeting," I replied softly, stepping into a private phone booth in the hallway. "What's wrong, Jess?" I am sitting at the Starbucks 2 blocks away from your apartment right now, Jessica explained, her breath coming fast. I just saw David, his mother, and Sarah sitting at a corner table together. Chloe, I overheard their entire conversation. You need to be extremely smart and careful about this right now. They do not think this morning was a misunderstanding at all. My stomach dropped into a cold, bottomless pit. What did they say? Your mother-in-law explicitly told David that he needs to go home tonight, grovel at your feet, play the pathetic victim, and cry if he has to, Jessica reported, her tone laced with absolute disgust. She said if you still refuse to put his name on the deed, he needs to threaten you with an immediate divorce. She literally said out loud, a 32-year-old woman with a dead mother and zero family support won't ever dare to leave her husband. And then Sarah chimed in, calling you a greedy bitch for wanting to keep your mother's house for yourself. I leaned my back against the cold glass wall of the phone booth, a freezing chill coursing down my spine. Jessica's voice cracked with pure indignation over the receiver. Chloe. David just sat there the entire time. He didn't defend you once. Not a single word came out of his mouth to stop them. I closed my eyes tightly, swallowing the bitter taste of betrayal. The most agonizing part of the entire ordeal was not my mother-in-law or sister-in-law plotting against me. The most soul-crushing part was that the man I had loved and called my husband for 3 years sat there, listened to their predatory scheme, and chose silence. I arrived back at our South Loop apartment at roughly 7 o'clock that evening. The living room lights were blazing brightly through the windows. The moment I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I saw David, his mother, and Sarah sitting side by side on the plush sofa. A plate of freshly sliced fruit sat on the glass coffee table alongside 3 glasses of ice water. It looked like a carefully staged courtroom waiting to conduct a hostile corporate negotiation. My mother-in-law looked up as the door closed, offering a tight, artificial smile. Chloe, you're finally home. Come sit down, dear. Let's all clear the air like adults. I dropped my heavy leather tote bag onto an armchair near the entry. I did not take off my trench coat, nor did I step any further into the room. There is no need to beat around the bush, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. I want to hear David speak first. David stood up slowly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes desperately avoiding my direct gaze. Chloe, today was just a massive, stupid misunderstanding. You know how Sarah is. She's immature, and she was just talking out of her ass on the phone. I stared directly into his eyes, refusing to let him look away. Then answer me one simple question, David. Have you ever, at any point in our marriage, planned to ask me to put your name on the deed to the Lincoln Square condo? The living room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. David bit his lower lip nervously, taking an agonizingly long time before muttering, I just thought, since we are married, major assets ought to be joint property. It just makes it easier to plan for our collective future. I let out a dry, bitter laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. And what about selling my mother's condo, so we can buy a massive house in Naperville where your mother and sister can live with us? Sarah's face instantly flushed a violent shade of red. Chloe. Don't twist my words like that. I have a young child. I just want some financial stability in my life. Is wanting stability a crime? I turned my gaze sharply toward her. The crime is trying to build your personal stability on the corpse of my mother's house. My mother-in-law slammed her hand down onto the wooden armrest of the sofa, her face twisting into a scowl. You are crossing a serious line, young lady. When you marry into a family, you look out for the welfare of that family. That condo is sitting over in Lincoln Square practically empty anyway. What on earth do you lose by helping your own sister-in-law get on her feet? I looked at the woman I had respectfully called Mom for 3 long years, feeling a wave of pure, unadulterated disgust wash over me. What do I lose? I lose the single tangible memory my mother left behind for me. I lose my safety net. I lose my trust. And I lose this pathetic marriage. David flinched violently, stepping forward. Chloe, stop throwing the word divorce around as if it's some kind of casual threat. Without saying another word, I walked past them into the bedroom, pulled a medium hardshell suitcase out of the closet, and began unzipping it on the bed. I had made my final decision hours ago, while sitting in my office booth. It isn't a threat, David, I called out over my shoulder. I am leaving tonight. Tomorrow morning, my divorce attorney will be formally contacting you. If you have any tiny shred of human decency left inside you, do not attempt to make this process any uglier than it already is. The living room went dead silent as I rolled the suitcase out toward the front door. David rushed across the room, planting himself directly in my path to block the exit. He lowered his voice, trying desperately to project a calm, reasonable demeanor, but the sheer panic in his eyes was impossible to hide. Chloe, please don't blow our entire life up over a stupid argument. We can close the front door right now and work this out between the two of us. I looked down at his hand gripping the handle of my suitcase, the exact same hand that had held mine at the altar, the hand that had promised before God and our friends to protect me. Now, that hand was desperately trying to trap me, not out of genuine love, but out of a terrifying panic that I was walking out the door with the prime real estate and inheritance money his family hadn't managed to steal yet. Take your hand off my bag, David, I said softly. Chloe, please just be reasonable, take your hand off my bag right now. My mother-in-law shot up from the sofa, her voice rising into a sharp, vicious shriek. Are you seriously walking out? Dragging a suitcase down the hallway in the middle of the night like a hysterical child. What on earth are the neighbors in this building going to think? You are publicly embarrassing this entire family. I turned to face her, feeling an unprecedented, absolute sense of calm wash over my spirit. This family lost every single ounce of its dignity the exact moment you and your daughter sat down at a coffee shop to plot how to extort a grieving woman. My walking out the door doesn't embarrass you, your own greed does. Sarah pointed a shaking finger at me from across the room. Don't you dare sit there and play the innocent victim, Chloe. Your mother's house has been sitting there for years. Selling it to help your husband's family is what any decent, loving wife would do. You are just a calculating, penny-pinching, selfish. I stared directly at her, cutting her off mid-insult with an icy, deliberate cadence. Sarah, you are an adult woman with a husband and a child of your own. If you want a house, go out into the world and work for it. Stop expecting another woman's dead mother to pay for your life. Sarah choked on her breath, her face turning pale as she stumbled backward. David tried to grab my arm, attempting to pull me toward the private hallway to isolate me from his family. Chloe, I am so sorry. I admit Mom and Sarah went way too far today, but I swear I never wanted to force you into anything. I thought if we co-owned the property, it would bring us closer together as a couple. I let out a loud, mocking laugh. Closer together. By taking my separate property and legally converting it into yours. Why is it that in this marriage, the word ours only ever means yours? Haven't I been a good, devoted wife to you for 3 years, David? I looked around the open-concept apartment. I had personally handpicked the sheer curtains, the organic linen bed sheets, the warm brass lamps. I had poured my heart, my salary, and my energy into transforming a cold rental space into a warm, welcoming home. But as it turned out, I was the only person playing house. You are only ever good to me when I am completely submissive, David, I said, tears finally brimming in my eyes. You are only ever sweet to me when I yield to your demands. You only love me when I don't stand in the way of your family's insatiable greed. That isn't love. That is fattening up a calf for the slaughter. David went completely ash pale. That is an utterly horrific thing for you to say to your husband. It isn't half as horrific as telling your sister that I have a dead mother and no family, so I have nobody left to defend me, I retorted cleanly. David went utterly, completely silent. That absolute silence was the loudest, most damning confession he could have ever offered. I yanked my suitcase handle from his weakened grip and pulled it through the front doorway into the carpeted hallway. This time, nobody moved to stop me. Before walking toward the elevators, I turned and looked at the three of them standing in the apartment doorway one last time. Expect to hear from my attorney by tomorrow afternoon. If you attempt to drag this process out or make it difficult, I will take every single piece of evidence to court. My mother-in-law sneered, folding her arms tightly across her chest. Fine. Go ahead and divorce him. But we will see how the marital assets get legally split in court. Don't you dare think for a second that you can just walk away with everything. I offered a simple, serene nod. You're right. Let's make the legal boundaries crystal clear. What is mine stays mine, and I don't want a single dime of your family's money. I walked down the quiet hallway and pressed the elevator call button. It was only when the heavy metal doors slid shut, sealing me inside the elevator car alone, that hot tears finally spilled over my eyelashes. I wasn't crying because I regretted walking out on my marriage. I was crying out of profound pity for the naive, trusting Chloe of the past 3 years, the woman who had tried so desperately to believe she had married into a loving family, only to realize she was nothing more than easy financial prey. That night, I stayed at Jessica's apartment downtown. The moment she opened her door and saw my pale face, she pulled me into a tight, fierce hug. You're safe now, Chloe. You got out. That's all that matters. I buried my face in her shoulder and finally wept freely. She made me a bowl of hot soup, forcing me to eat while my phone vibrated incessantly on the kitchen counter. David called 7 times. His mother called 3 times. Sarah sent long, manipulative paragraphs demanding that I reconsider. I powered the device off completely, placed it face down, and took a deep breath. The next morning at 9 o'clock sharp, Jessica and I walked into the high-rise law office of attorney Laura Sullivan, a highly renowned, ironclad divorce litigator in downtown Chicago. Laura was a sharp woman in her late 40s, wearing a tailored navy blazer, possessing calm, assessing eyes that instantly projected complete authority. I sat across from her mahogany desk and detailed every single event, from accidentally grabbing David's phone on the L train, to Sarah's recorded phone call, to the hostile confrontation in our living room the night before. Laura listened intently without interrupting, taking neat notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished speaking, she set her pen down and looked up. The Lincoln Square condo. Was the property deed registered solely under your name prior to your marriage? Yes, I stated firmly. My mother paid cash for the unit. I possess all the original closing documents, the title deed, and the bank wire transfers proving it was an explicit gift to me before the wedding. And the $80,000 inheritance? She asked. It sits in a separate high-yield savings account under my name alone. It was a direct life insurance payout. I haven't touched a single cent of it, and David's name has never been attached to the account. Attorney Sullivan smiled faintly, leaning back in her executive chair. Under Illinois marriage law, property acquired prior to a marriage, or acquired through explicit inheritance or personal gift, is classified strictly as non-marital property. As long as you did not commingle those funds, meaning you never used that specific account to pay off joint marital debts, or allow his paychecks to be deposited into it, it remains 100% your separate asset. The condo is yours. Period. A massive, heavy weight that had been crushing my chest for 24 hours instantly lifted. What if they attempt to drag the litigation out or threaten me? I asked. If he refuses to sign a fair marital settlement agreement, We proceed directly to trial, Laura stated smoothly. It extends the timeline, but the statutory law regarding non-marital assets is absolute. The critical key for you right now, Chloe, is that you must remain completely stoic. Do not sign a single paper without my review. Do not transfer a single dollar. Do not agree to anything verbally. If they attempt to contact you, communicate strictly in writing or let it go to voicemail so we build an undeniable record. Laura looked me dead in the eye, her tone turning deeply serious. The legal battle is actually remarkably straightforward. The emotional battlefield is where they will try to win. When his family realizes they cannot bully you through the law, they will attempt to break your spirit emotionally. They will apologize, cry, play the helpless victims, or weaponize the sanctity of marriage to make you cave. You must remember exactly why you walked out of that apartment. Following our legal consultation, I took an Uber directly to my Lincoln Square condo. I hadn't stepped inside the unit in several months. The hardwood floors were covered in a faint layer of dust, but the moment I unlocked the front door and stepped into the sunlit living room, a deeply comforting, familiar scent washed over me. It smelled like my mother, like safety, like a sacred space where I never had to shrink myself to appease greedy people. I stood in the center of the quiet room and wept tears of pure relief. Over the next 2 weeks, the Miller family launched a desperate, multi-front campaign to force my submission. When sweet text messages and tearful voicemails from David failed to elicit a response, they escalated to open harassment. One Friday evening, as I was walking home from the local grocery store near my condo, Sarah ambushed me outside the front iron gate. "Chloe, are you completely out of your mind?" Sarah screamed, marching up to me on the sidewalk. "You actually filed formal divorce papers. You are pushing my brother into a financial corner. He is an absolute wreck. Mom's blood pressure is through the roof, and you're just sitting up here in your fancy condo acting like a cold-hearted victim. Do you have any shred of conscience left?" I stepped back calmly, pulled out my phone, and visibly tapped the screen to initiate a high-definition audio recording. "If you have something to say, Sarah, say it clearly for my attorney." Sarah's face turned a violent shade of purple. "You think hiring an expensive lawyer makes you invincible? When we go before a judge, the court is going to look at David's contributions as your husband for 3 years. He has legal rights. Being a husband does not grant a man the legal right to steal his wife's premarital inheritance," I replied, my voice chillingly level. Sarah gritted her teeth, stepping closer. "If you had just sold this place and given Dave his fair cut, this entire nightmare would have gone away. If you keep playing hardball, don't blame me when I post all over social media telling everyone what a selfish, ungrateful bitch you are. Everyone in Chicago will know you abandoned your husband over money." I looked at her calmly, entirely unbothered by her pathetic threats. "Go right ahead and post it, Sarah. And the exact moment you do, I will publicly post the crystal-clear audio recordings of you and your mother plotting to extort a dead woman's estate so you could finance a basement beauty salon. I have the audio files, the text logs, and third-party witnesses. If you want a public circus, I will personally buy the front-row tickets." Sarah's jaw dropped in absolute horror, the color instantly draining from her face as she stared at the recording phone in my hand. The pre-trial settlement conference took place on a rainy Tuesday morning at the Daily Center in downtown Chicago. I wore a tailored black business suit, my hair pulled back into a sharp bun, carrying a thick binder of financial documents. David sat in the glass waiting area alongside his high-priced attorney. His mother and Sarah sat in the public gallery outside, glaring at me as I walked past. Inside the private conference room, the court-appointed mediator asked if there was any lingering possibility of marital reconciliation. "Absolute zero," I stated instantly. David looked at the mediator, attempting to play the role of the wounded, loving husband. "I don't want a divorce, Your Honor. I love my wife deeply. She has simply been manipulated by her bitter friends and completely misunderstood my family's innocent intentions. I looked at him, amazed by his terrifying capacity for shameless deceit under oath. I nudged Laura gently. My attorney calmly placed a portable speaker on the conference table and pressed play on her laptop. David's recorded voice demanding a $100,000 payout for 3 years of service, as a husband echoed loudly through the sterile room, followed immediately by the audio recording of Sarah threatening to smear my reputation online. David's face turned the color of ash. His attorney cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his glasses. Emotions were running high during a domestic dispute, Your Honor. My client was merely expressing financial frustration. Attorney Laura Sullivan didn't miss a beat. She slammed a thick stack of financial audits across the table. The Lincoln Square property was purchased in cash by my client's late mother prior to the marriage. Title has remained exclusively in Chloe's name. The $80,000 inheritance sits in an untouched, non-commingled account. Furthermore, we have provided 3 years of joint bank statements proving my client personally paid 80% of all household marital expenses. Simultaneously, your client secretly transferred approximately $45,000 of his personal income directly to his mother via electronic transfers. If anyone in this room has a valid claim for the dissipation of marital assets, it is my client. Laura leaned forward, her eyes locking onto David's attorney. However, my client is willing to waive a formal claim for restitution of those dissipated funds, provided your client signs the marital settlement agreement today and walks away with exactly what he brought into this marriage. Absolutely nothing. The mediator looked at David's attorney, raising an eyebrow. Counsel, I strongly advise you to speak privately with your client regarding the absolute statutory realities of Illinois property law before we waste a judge's valuable time on a trial. The conference ended abruptly. 3 weeks later, the formal divorce decree was officially signed by a state judge. The court ruled entirely in my favor, declaring the Lincoln Square condo and the $80,000 inheritance to be my exclusive, non-marital property, while permanently dismissing David's desperate counterclaims with prejudice. When the judge's gavel struck the bench with a firm thud, I didn't burst into joyous cheers. I simply felt a massive, suffocating iron door permanently close behind me. As I walked out of the majestic courthouse onto Dearborn Street, David jogged up behind me, his shoulders slumped. Chloe, wait. I stopped, turning to face him. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I really, truly am sorry. I looked at him calmly. This was the exact apology I had desperately craved months ago, but standing there in the bright sunlight, it meant absolutely nothing. You aren't sorry that you hurt me, David, I said softly. You are simply sorry that you lost. No. I regret everything, he stammered. I offered a gentle, sad smile. I used to regret it, too. I regretted foolishly believing that shrinking myself would somehow make your family love me. But I don't regret walking away. Because of your greed, I learned how to stand up and fiercely defend my own life. I turned on my heel and walked toward Jessica, who was waiting by her car with 2 warm coffees. The Chicago sky above was brilliantly clear and blue. For the very first time in 3 years, I felt as though I could finally breathe clean air. A full year passed. I was living full-time in my beautifully restored Lincoln Square condo. I had repainted the light-filled walls, purchased vibrant new furniture, and planted a box of blooming hydrangeas on the balcony, the very kind my mother had loved so deeply. I secured my well-deserved executive promotion at the PR firm, leading my own team, earning my own substantial income, and deciding precisely how to live my own independent life. Nobody called my self-respect selfish. Nobody attempted to weaponize the sacred word family to steal my safety net. Looking back on the storm that nearly consumed me, I carried 4 immutable truths forward in my heart. First, A woman must fiercely and unapologetically protect her independent assets, her legal paperwork, and her safety net, no matter how deeply she believes she loves a man. Second, a healthy marriage can only ever survive on mutual, transparent respect, never on one-sided emotional sacrifice. Third, anyone who truly loves you will never use the concept of family to strip away what is rightfully yours. And finally, when you are faced with cold betrayal, do not sit in the dark and weep. Gather your evidence, retain a formidable attorney, lean on the people who genuinely love you, and fight like hell for your freedom.